This is the way Christmas Eve is supposed to feel. It's supposed to be full. Susan and I were driving in this afternoon, listening to the BBC on the radio, and they were talking about Bethlehem tonight and how not full it is. So tonight I would encourage us as we celebrate and give thanks with joy, with music, with all that Christmas Eve is supposed to be, that we remember that tonight that the Holy Land is the hurting land. So as we give thanks tonight, we need to keep our hearts open to the places where people are hurting and in harm's way. That's what it means to belong to each other and to God. This evening, to our north, in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, there are more barrels of bourbon in inventory than there are people. In the state of Nebraska, there are more heads of cattle than there are people. But wait, there's more. In the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, more Philly cheesesteaks are consumed each year than the actual number of people who live in Philadelphia. I don't get out much. This kind of information fascinates me whenever I hear it because I believe we're often taught to assume otherwise. In our world, there is us, the people, and then the other stuff in the background, right? But then someone tells me there are more surfboards in Hawaii than there are people, and I have to make room again for what it is I do and do not know. In the story regarding the birth of Jesus that we have just heard, I would like to suggest the possibility that more sheep were present for the early hours of Jesus' life than people. Along with Mary and Joseph, when the shepherds arrived to see the child, I assume the sheep tagged along because they are sheep. And since Mary and Joseph placed their child in a manger or a food trough, it would not be surprising if other animals were there simply present to eat and drink, unaware that they were basking in the glow of the holiest night. Y'all, they were there for the food, not realizing that the bread of life was in their midst. Along with sheep, it is a tradition that nativity scenes include oxen and donkeys. This suggested symbolism of both clean and unclean animals, representing both Jew and Gentile, reinforces the belief that Jesus has come into the world for all of us. And some of the earliest icons depicting the nativity of Jesus, along with the child, only an ox and a donkey are present. Like the wild beasts who attend to Jesus in the wilderness during his 40 days of fasting and temptation, so the ox and donkey attend to the Christ child in the humble manger. We often speak of it as the humble manger. Let's be honest, that's being polite. If it were described to us without any additional context, well, in East Tennessee, we would say, that's pitiful. And we would not think of them as the Holy Family, would we? Someone would call Child Protective Services and do their best to get their child out of that home. You just can't help some people. In a poem entitled How to Be a Poet, the Kentucky writer Wendell Berry states, "There are no unsacred places. There are only sacred places and desecrated places." When Mary gave birth to Jesus in a world that had no room for him or his mother or his father, then they are left to place the child in the only place they could find. This food trough will have to do, and it will have to be a bed for the night. And because it must make do, then it becomes sacred. It becomes holy. Animals in which God delights have been fed at this food trough. And now this food trough will provide a first home on earth for the one in whose face we say we see God. Now, it's ironic to think that churches this night so often struggle to find enough room for people to gather and celebrate an event when there was probably plenty of room around the manger. Granted, there was no room in proper dwellings at Bethlehem that night, but if you want to gather near the manger, there's no law against that. The child in the manger, resting in a food trough, would grow and speak later in his life of drawing all people to himself, when he would be raised up for all to see upon a cross, which was made holy again because he was on it. On that day, there was a crowd, but it was a crowd of enemies. But for now, in the manger, the whole world is not gathered around on that first night. Mary and Joseph, shepherds, sheep, animals queuing up to eat, gazing upon the light of the world, that's all that we count as present. On that first night, the world's most important citizens did not rush to Bethlehem to see the child. There were no skyboxes, no need of VIP seating. No one was rushing to see this young girl and this old man and this child. They were about to become refugees. Rather, the beasts of the field and animals eager to be fed and satisfied at the trough saw what you and I now count as sacred. But before we counted it so, those animals were present. You may recall that there was a time when it was important for leaders to be able to refer to their humble beginnings. Think Lincoln and log cabin. As Christians, we say that the Christ is the one we follow and the one whose teachings guide our common life now. It's the Christ, we say, who feeds us at this altar. The Christ, we proclaim, began life here in the most humble way in the midst of animals and the creation that groaned. The Christ feeds us, is food for us, but tonight we recall that first he was placed in the midst of food for animals. Now that does not seem like a proper place for a child, let alone the incarnate one. Given our tendencies, we would be tempted to change the story and to soften the scene and to clean up the mess and to keep those animals back at a safe distance. But friends, please recall this night that the whole point of the incarnation is that God did not keep a safe distance from you and me and our pain and our need and our hurt and our sin. God came close, dared to come even too close. Through a child, God came to know our pain and was even wounded by us. But first the animals saw him lying in their manger, taking up room from them. We say there was no room in the inn where the people were. There was only room in the manger, a place for the animals. And so his life began with the rest of creation. The animals were there, clean and unclean, gazing upon a child, brushing past him for food, unaware of just how much grace one manger can hold. It turns out it can hold all of it. In creating the world, we believe that God took delight in each day with each act of creation. God took delight in the sky and the sea, in the trees and the birds, in all the creeping things. In entering the world through the Christ child, God began again with creation. The beasts of the field saw the one who had made them, and they did not know enough to give thanks for their creation, but they were created all the same. Tonight, my prayer for you and me is that we can look upon the child, the incarnate one, and have some awareness of what it is we are seeing. And in seeing him, may we find the words to give thanks. And if we cannot find the words, may we at least be able to share the meal that contains all that we need. God was made human in Jesus. Merry Christmas.